Hey, this is Barry Topping, and you're listening to XVGM Radio.
Welcome to XVGM Radio, where the bits keep coming. I'm Justin.
And I'm Mike.
And this is episode 70, Paradise Killer composer interview with Barry Epoch Topping.
Some of you may be saying to yourself, wait a minute, Epoch. We did a whole episode on Chrono Trigger with Singing Mountain, and Drew very clearly told us it was Epic. Well, Barry told us something very interesting. It's actually depending on the region that you're from, like the part of the world that you're from. So you're saying that it's Epoch, right, Barry?
Firstly, I don't know if I want to get involved in this podcast if there's history here. Yeah, when I was deciding, because with any word that's spelled strangely, I was like, I need to know how to say this, otherwise I'm gonna like fill myself. So when I looked it up, yeah, apparently Epoch is the American pronunciation and Epoch is the British pronunciation. That's what I said on Google. That's, you know. But yeah, so I figure since it's my artist name, I can say it however I want. So.
There you go.
That's also true too.
Today it's Epoch.
Exactly. So we are doing a spotlight on a very interesting, weird, different, cool game called Paradise Killer, and the composer is Barry Topping. So we're gonna chat with him about the amazing music in this game. So we want to first off thank you so much for being part of this episode, and we look forward to diving deep into everything that this soundtrack has to offer.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the first track that we came in on is a fantastic track called Paradise, and in parentheses it's called Stay Forever. So I have a lot of questions about this particular track in general, but before we dive into that, why don't we give Barry some time to tell us a little bit about your musical background and how you got interested in music and kind of like how that all led you down a path to become like a video game composer.
Sure. Like a lot of people, I started playing guitar in high school because you know, you reach a certain age, you start listening to rock music, and then the next step from there was really playing guitar. So I was a guitarist. I started playing in bands, and sort of through the enjoyment of doing that is, you know, when I realised that I wanted to try and make a career out of this. And I'm sure it's the same all over the world, but in Scotland, and the way our curriculum's taught is there's not a quick, direct route to getting a university degree for music. The way that they teach music in high schools doesn't really equip you for the sort of, we have a thing called associated board, which is like the standard for how musical theory is taught, and you don't really get taught that in high school because they're teaching you how to play the glockenspiel and stuff like that instead. So I decided to go to college because I wanted to go to university eventually, and it was at college I decided to switch from being a guitarist to being a composer, because I mean I was writing songs in bands I was playing with anyway. So yeah, I was a composer all through college, all through university, and then I started working on a variety of stuff. I was always still playing in bands. Like I tell people, I played in a wedding band for 5 years pretty much.
Oh, that's cool.
Nice. Played in metal bands, like did synth pop stuff, just played hundreds and hundreds of shows. And yeah, I was always writing songs anyway, so I figured it'd be good to try and, you know, learn how to do that. I say again as a career, but it's not just what you know. I mean, there's a much harder path to a career. So yeah, it's just always been my passion, and then I've I say it's probably about 10 years I've been seriously writing music now, just for a variety of stuff, whether that be smaller games. I wrote a lot of stuff for animated shorts, I've written stuff for TV shows, that kind of stuff. But games has always been where my passion is, so it was sort of through playing guitar, writing music, enjoying playing music, and loving video games that I decided I would absolutely love to write music from video games. And Paradise Killer is sort of my biggest project to date, probably the one I'm happiest with too. So.
For sure, yeah. No, it's a great soundtrack, and it's interesting to see your path go from, you know, just like being in a band, learning guitar and everything in high school, to evolving onto bigger, better things, especially since this is something that you want to go for. So it's like when you get to that level, it's really cool to see yourself succeed in that aspect. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's quite hard. Like I've been sort of plugging away at it for years, and I've always loved working on music, but realistically it was never something I could do as a full-time job.
Yeah, especially in this day and age when you know, like Spotify and all that, they're paying out like barely anything for digital rights for music and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's played in a band knows as well. Like I think about, you know, you used to show up to a gig, you'd sell 100 tickets to your mates and you'd get nothing back. I think it's a little better in the States. Certainly my experience of playing in America is they pay bands more, but over here, you know, there was five people in a band, and you were rehearsing, you know, for 2 hours every week, and you were losing money on it constantly. I think I had to kind of reprogram my brain into being like, yes, you can make a career where you can actually make money out of doing music. The last sort of 5 years is when I've really kind of come into, yeah, I can actually do this as a career.
That's cool. Yeah, it's the sort of thing, especially going from a band unit, which is like, you know, a multi-piece kind of puzzle where, everybody's got their own personalities. Everybody's, you're dealing with everybody in the band and even some of the outside aspects of the band, managers and touring and whatnot. So for you to kind of break away from that and just focus on yourself, where you're just, it's just you and maybe some of the people that you're hiring on to do work for the soundtrack, if that's applicable, it's a much more cultivated craft of what you're doing.
It's difficult, but for different reasons.
Exactly.
It's easier, but
I think I messaged you really late at night at like close to midnight.
You did.
And we weren't recording or anything. And I was just like, oh my God, Justin, you need to listen to this soundtrack. And you were like, you thought, I think that I was talking about something different, but
yeah, I was confused when
Remember
I was confused when you messaged me, because it was just like it brought me to the Paradise Killer soundtrack. I think the Bandcamp, and I think we were talking about something else during the day. So like I saw this and I was just like, I don't understand what's going on. Like it didn't occur to me that you were just like, hey, this is a soundtrack you should check out. I thought something else was going on, and then eventually
Right.
I was just like, well, actually, this looks like the art looks really neat. Let me check some of this out. And just like it didn't matter which track I play. Like I started with this track obviously because you just generally always start with the first one. But whenever I'm listening to an OST, I usually just bounce around. Sometimes it's based on the names of the tracks, like whatever looks cool. Unless it's like a soundtrack that I know and love, I rarely just listen to it straight through. But everything that I played was just like it sounded slightly different, like, and it was just really cool. So I was like, this is weird, like not weird in any bad way, or like weird that it was good. Just like the tracks were all like there was cohesion, but there was like very different style. You tapped a lot of different styles, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And then of course I play the game, and the game is really weird. I've got a lot of hours into it at this point already, and you can play any of the songs that you find in the game whenever. Like it's just, you can kind of like put it on random, or you can switch between tracks.
Right.
And this is, I think, one of the first ones that you get, and I'm pretty sure it's also like the first track to play. Like when you jump out of your house or whatever and free fall for the opening credits, this is the track that's playing, and it's wild. Like it reminds me of something out of like the mid to late 70s, not quite disco, but just like that R&B style, and like really, really boppy. And like I can't help but smile while listening to the song. In fact, I didn't even look up the lyrics until just now when we were listening to it. I was like, I can hear what they're saying, but I don't process lyrics all that well unless I'm focusing on them. So I brought them up, and the lyrics are really nice too. And funny, like not that it's. Not that it wouldn't, but like I was just laughing because like these are really apropos to what I'm experiencing in the game.
So the music itself, though, I would say it's like a post-disco kind of like 80s, not easy listening or anything like that, but it's very funky. It's very R&B, like 80s R&B, like Luther Vandross type, kind of style, mixed with like a very jazzy vibe too. That saxophone that comes in is really, to me, the star of this is the bass line, the saxophone, and the vocals. The vocals, the thing is that the track that you're talking about, which is this track that comes in when you first like jump out of, when you're leaving your kind of exile, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you're free falling, and while you're free falling, you're listening to this song minus the vocals, if I recall. The vocal version is only in the credits. So but the vocals are great in Paradise Stay Forever. I gotta ask, what was the reasoning for leaving that version in the credits only? Unless, just keep in mind, I have not beaten this game yet. So it may be showing up at a later point in time. Was there a specific reason why that version was not in the game? Did they feel like it would be too noisy or something?
I don't really feel like, even though it's the theme of Paradise Killer, right, I didn't want it to be too front-loaded, because there are some stings that happen towards the end of the game that are based off the theme for that. It's the main theme. The themes from Paradise Killer, from Paradise Stay Forever, appear in other songs. And originally it was the title screen music, but I really wasn't, it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I wanted to have some separate title screen music that kind of set the vibe in a different way, and then we have this bit of Paradise, and then you have the instrumental version of Paradise Stay Forever as you're walking around. And I think we just felt that the vocal version was really special, so we wanted something that was like it's a reward for players almost.
Right. Yeah.
Like we were so happy with it, and we felt like it was a really special thing. And we kind of went back and forth with the idea of, do we have this in the game? People can walk around and listen to it. But with having vocals too, we didn't want it to be the only sort of in-game song that had vocals.
That makes
like
sense.
It would have stuck out a bit, right? But so yeah, it was a mix of like feeling like the vocal version wasn't consistent with the rest of the in-game soundtrack, but also really wanting to be like, this is special. You've earned this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It maybe sounds a bit arrogant. You've earned this, but
No, that's a totally good point. Who did the vocals?
A lassie called Fiona Lynch, who's actually a local. She lives up the road. I knew her through friends. So she plays. There's a jazz bar in Edinburgh that has like a really great scene surrounding it. And she plays in a band there called the Sunday Sinners. And that's when I saw her singing with a band called the Sunday Sinners.
That's cool.
So when we came to look for singers, that was like, it's her.
Yeah. No, she did a great job. It really does add a very special and new dimension to the track. It lights it up, and it's not. I don't want to say this to take away from the in-game version, but like maybe it's just because this is the version I heard first. But when I listen to it in the game, when I'm walking around, in my head and like maybe even audibly, I'm like humming that vocal line, especially that chorus hook, that, you know, the oh red sky, you know, that is just, it gives a whole new melodic push to the track that really uplifts it. And you know, I think good vocals really do that with the track, to the point where when you listen to the song without vocals, it almost feels empty. It's not, but it almost gives it this vibe like, you know, something's missing from this song. It's still a testament to the track that you can go through, listen to the track while you're playing the game, and it's just such a fun, jazzy track to listen to.
It's quite difficult to get the balance of where we felt like we should put that track in its various guises, because a game like, I mean, Kaizen, they really wanted a theme song, and Paradise Killer is a game that should have a theme song. I feel
Yeah.
like, you know, a vocal theme tune for that game works perfect. So yeah, we tried really hard to make sure that, like I said, it wasn't too front-loaded, that we weren't hitting people with it. And I think, you know, you can play the entire game, and how many times do you hear that instrumental version? Like a bunch, you know, 10 times, maybe more. But I still see people, when they get to the credits, they're like, this was amazing, I was not expecting this.
Right.
I feel like we did a good job there of balancing where to use those tracks.
Absolutely. I've got a bit of a conflicting bit of information regarding the release date. Some sources are saying September 4th. Other sources are saying October 5th.
I was going to bring that up, actually.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what date it actually was released on. So, but I figured I'd at least mention it since there are conflicting sources. It was only a couple months ago, so if you're listening to this in the future, you're going to be like, who cares? But regardless, it came out for Windows and Nintendo Switch. Are there any other, do you know if there's any other platforms planned for a release?
There's nothing to announce right now.
Nothing? Okay. All right. So hope you got a Switch or Windows, because this game is definitely a very interesting game that we're going to talk about more when we come back from our next break. Justin, what track do we got coming up next?
After that amazing intro, I'm going to start us off with, I'd say one of my favorite tracks, but they're all kind of my favorite, so it's hard to pick. The end of this episode is going to be really, really rough to try to pick one thing.
I know.
This is Breeze With You, obviously off of our Spotlight Paradise Killer by Barry Epoch Topping. Okay, welcome back. That was Breeze With You, a fantastic, smooth, relaxing track from a soundtrack full of amazing stuff, which is Paradise Killer, and we are talking to the composer, Barry Epoch Topping, today. So this was one of the first tracks that I found in the game.
You start with it, actually. There
you do?
4 tracks that you start with.
Oh, okay. Then that's why I've lost a lot of memory of what happened at the very, very beginning, because I've been doing a lot of running around. Like, I spent a lot of time in the beginning doing some hunting, just like finding a lot of the collectibles. And lately I've been doing so much story stuff that it's kind of like knocked a lot of the older stuff out of my head. So okay, so this is one of the ones that you actually start with. That explains why it's one of the first ones that I remember hearing. Like this feels very like late 70s, early 80s to me. Very, I can't even think of the name of the genre, but it's kind of it's so relaxing. Like, it reminds me of some of the stuff almost out of like Phoenix Wright, where it helps kind of like set the intrigue. Like, you're not, it's not super energetic. It's not like, a trial sequence. It's just going around looking for clues, talking to people, and not too stressed out yet, because you haven't found out that things in this world are very, very strange and hard to reconcile with what we know of the real world. It's such a smooth, kind of like maybe 80s smooth jazz.
Yeah. I mean, you're in Paradise, right? This is Paradise Killer, so you got to feel like you're there.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those tracks. Because when we had to pick the sort of 4 tracks you start off with, what we have to pick there is like a microcosm of what the full soundtrack is like. Because the sort of key thing that I kept thinking when I was writing this music is that the player can listen to any song they want at pretty much any time, providing they've collected it. So you need to provide not only a variety of styles, which is what I wanted to do, but a variety of dynamics, which we thought was like important to do. So then Breeze With You is like, well, like you said, sometimes there's a lot going on, so Breeze With You is one of the decompressing tunes, definitely.
Was the decision to have most of the soundtrack as like a collectible playlist, was that a decision that you made, or did the developer kind of say like, hey, this is what we want to do with the music? Yeah,
that was in place. The details kind of moved around about how we were going to do that, but the basic idea of you pick up music was something that was in place when I came on.
Oh, okay. And regarding the game itself, there's a lot to dive into this game, and we're going to spend the time doing it as best as we can, even though, as we said before, Justin and I haven't finished this one yet. But Justin, I think you're definitely farther than I am. But from what I gather about the game, so it feels to me, at least as far as like what type of game it is an open world kind of like adventure detective story type of game. It's got the first person perspective of like Doom, for example. So it's kind of like if Phoenix Wright and Doom had a weird like vaporwave baby, I guess you could say.
I think that's exactly what you said in the last episode when we introduced the concept.
I think so. Yeah. That's at least what it feels like to me. You're running around in first person mode. You can do anything you want, pretty much. You could jump around, you could run, but your sole purpose of the game is to try to find out, basically searching for evidence and clues in order to solve various different types of mysteries as to who did what. The very beginning of the game is a bit difficult. At least I felt it was a bit difficult to jump into because there's a lot of text initially, and it's not like I have a problem reading or anything like that, but it felt like there was a ton of information being like flooded into my eyeballs, and I was just like, yo, I just want to vibe to this music, like chill out for a second, let me get my bearings, So from what I understand, there's like a cult of these humans that are actually immortal. So I don't necessarily agree that they're humans, but they're human shaped, basically.
They are classified as humans. As far as that, like if you look up their information in the game, like all so there's the syndicate, and then there's regular humans, and then there's the council. It's so the trouble that I had at the beginning, I think, was similar to you, and it wasn't because there was a wall of text. It was because they introduce all of these concepts right out of the gate, and I was having trouble wrapping my brain around it. I'm about somewhere between 5 and 8 hours in at this point, and I have now my brain now accepts what's going on. Also, like, part of the thing, and I didn't realize this until I've gotten a lot farther into the game, is I think they do it on purpose. It's kind of vague and like what the heck's actually going on purpose, because as you talk to everybody and as you find things, you learn more about the world, the people, and like it all starts to click a lot more. But right at the beginning, you're playing as the character Lady Loved Eyes. That is her name, and you need to really quickly get used to the fact that names are weird in this game.
Yeah,
because like it's not like Mike Levy or Justin Schneider. It's Lady Loved Eyes or Eyes Kiwami or Witness to the End, which the names make sense as you get further in, but like it took me a while to wrap my head around the names, the reality, the world. But like, so the concept is that there is this syndicate of people who have been more or less been granted immortality by a god or the gods. I am still trying to figure that part out.
They're like alien gods, though.
Well, all of the gods and demons are just aliens from different planets. People here are from Earth because that was the other thing that made me so confused, is they reference real locations and like time periods and stuff from Earth. And I'm just like, but you said, oh, okay, I'll figure it out. And without spoiling or ruining too much, like the whole thing is like, the syndicate has been basically like kidnapping people from Earth and the real world and bringing them to another reality to worship these alien gods, and they feed on the psychic energy. They've been trying to resurrect their gods by using kidnapped people.
Regarding the islands, because they're trying to craft this like true paradise that to exist in, and what seems to be happening is they will create one and then it won't go well, or something will fail, or there'll be a problem, and then they'll basically recycle it and then restart it over. And I'm not quite sure if like they're killing people to do that, and then because I think they are killing people, because there's these ghosts that you'll find like all over the place. And
they're
the ghosts
definitely killing people.
Yeah, no, that's part of the end of the island. They talk about it. You'll find out when you get further in, but they literally talk about mass slaughter. Everybody on all of the humans on the island are brought and killed simultaneously, and there's a psychic energy piece to that as well. There's definitely a lot of like, I don't even know if I'd call it moral gray area. Like the people in this game are not necessarily good people. I mean, they're not necessarily evil either. Like maybe it is morally gray. It's really interesting because like there's nobody in this game who is truly a good person or truly a bad person. At least not that I've gotten to yet.
There's a lot of morally questionable people.
There's people I don't like.
I mean, it all depends. It all depends how you want to play, I guess. You could decide to be a good person.
That's true. There's a lot of conversations that you have in the game where a lot of that stuff is called out. Like there's a character that is very, very weird who just pops up and you can talk to, and you have very strange conversations. And occasionally they go into like, what's good, what's bad, like, or good versus evil and stuff like that. And they do try to like deep dive on those topics, which I think is really, really cool and a good idea, because there are a number of things that they discuss, and a number of happenings or circumstances that are kind of relatable to just things going on in the world today, like people, the way that people view things versus like how I like what I view as good versus what you view as good. I mean, there are definitely some characters in this game that like I have taken a liking to, and I really hope that they don't turn out to be terrible people. There are some characters that I really don't like, and not like, oh, the game is bad, I don't like it, but like I don't like the personality. I really hate the character's guts, because they're just a lot of the characters also don't like Lady Loved Eyes, because she was exiled. Part of the history is she was exiled 3 million days ago, which I did the math is like 8,000 something years. There are just characters that don't like, because of why she was exiled, they hold a grudge, and then there are characters that just like they were friends with her and they are very nice to you.
Yeah, Lady Loved Eyes was a investigator who served this group called the Syndicate. And what ended up happening was she got tricked by a god into making one of the islands, which was Island 13. I think now we're up to 24. Right. So back on Island 13, she made it so that demons would be able to invade the island. And because of that, she was exiled to this far away, like sky high tower location, which is basically like a mini apartment where she basically chills out for all of eternity. And it wasn't until there was mysteries surrounding the massacre of the council on Island 24, and that's when they brought her back and said, hey, listen, we want you to investigate. So she's kind of coming back into all this, getting herself reacquainted with all these other people that were part of this world that she knew from way back when, and they're all just kind of like, oh yeah, there's this one girl who's like a friend of hers who like it's kind of like a taxi service, or like a friend of hers who like runs some sort of taxi service or something.
Yep.
And so you meet up with her, and then from there you end up going to the council, and they start giving you a little bit of information bit by bit. You start to go out and find all these people. So when you hold on the Switch, at least, when you hold the Z, what was it, the Z2 button, you'll be able to see little squares all lined up all over the map, in first person mode, and you can go, it tells you how far away you are from those people. So you can go to those people, you talk to them, you investigate, you ask them questions, and you're basically collecting evidence and information that you can piece together to solve the puzzle as to who killed, who done it, who murdered, who did the death thing. Yeah. And you have this AI laptop that kind of goes around with you. She's Starlight, British, or she's got like a British ethnicity as far as how she speaks and who she is or whatever. But you have this AI laptop called Starlight that kind of reminds me of like in Gem. You remember the cartoon Gem?
Oh my
Kind of
God.
reminds me of Synergy a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. I know that's an 80s deep dive for anybody who's listening who didn't grow up in the 80s, and they're like, what? Gem? Synergy? What? Just go look it up. Just Google it. But yeah, so that's just a little bit of brief info about the game. There's tons of stuff that we can get into, and I'm sure we will get into, but I figure we'll play my first pick, and that's going to be a track called House of Bliss. So we're going from a very relaxing kind of like Tetris CDI kind of style music into something very bumpin' and groovin'. So let's go ahead and give it a listen. Welcome back. That was House of Bliss off of the Paradise Killer soundtrack, and we are joined by composer Barry Epoch or Epoch Topping. House of Bliss, more like House of Amazing. That was great.
Oh man, those synth drum fills, man, those were so cool. It reminds me.
I love that rolling bass in the beginning.
Yeah, very important to me that the bass and the drums absolutely slapped in this tune. So
Absolutely.
Oh man, they did. They so did. This reminds me of a lot of like the synth pop type of stuff out of the 80s, which I am very much in love with. So
yeah,
this
same here.
In particular was just so like smooth and like it flowed really well. And I like all the little synthy bits.
I think more towards that middle part of the track is where you get more of the synth poppy kind of style, kind of like after those big hooks kind of end, and it kind of goes into the dun, 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 that. But there's also this like synth that's kind of played more towards the end of that first verse. I get some freestyle vibes. It's got a little bit of freestyle Latin kind of style to it, but that main lead and hook of that bass in that beginning, that is straight up like 80s dance, like late 80s dance music, 80s dance. So good.
Yeah, that's what I was going for. I wanted to write a tune that you could play in like New York ballrooms. And,
right.
You know, that was what came out. So
for sure. I mean, there's a lot of influence from 80s music, 90s dance music, freestyle, new wave, city pop, New Jack Swing, Latin music, easy listening, vaporwave. You've flooded this soundtrack with tons of amazing different genres. It's a very eclectic mix of that era. Is there a particular type of genre that you liked working with the most on this soundtrack? And if so, what was it and why?
It's hard. I mean, I love all those genres, and that's why they're all on the soundtrack. But I think the thing I love the most is the fusion of those genres, not one particular style, but being able to combine some different styles and different tunes was a lot of fun. I really liked doing the more sort of the city pop stuff was great because I don't think there are a lot of people doing that currently. There's not a lot of 2020 city pop kicking around, so there was quite a buzz doing that, writing city pop, future funk style music that wasn't really. I wasn't like I hadn't sampled anything. It was just like let's write a song that's, you know, evocative of that kind of style. And then I really liked doing House of Bliss because that was one of the last songs I wrote, and I just wanted something in there that was like really kind of dancey, really kind of clubby, because that was a vibe that I felt was missing. I just wanted to capture as many different styles within the soundtrack as we could, but that still felt Paradise Killer.
That's a good point too, because, you know, anything too super energetic kind of throws off the vibe a little bit, but I think you've got a really good mix of genres here that really encapsulates and influences the vibe of the soundtrack. I'll put it this way. Most of my Switch gaming is done late at night. Usually after my wife has gone to bed, I'm sitting next to her, I'm hanging out playing Switch. So it's really difficult to play this game because all I want to do is dance while I'm in bed.
That makes me happy. That's certainly the intention. So.
Good stuff. What I should start doing is playing more like during the day, or like when maybe I'll like go for a walk or something. I'll just bring my Switch with me and I'll just be dancing on the streets, like, you know, walking my dog or something while I'm playing this, because you can almost kind of in a way play this game one-handed because most of the motion that you're using is off of the left analog stick with a little bit of like left trigger, the right trigger, like jumping and running and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's good about it too is I think Switch is a good fit for this game because you can play it in short bursts. And this is, I mean, slightly off topic, but I think I love the most about Switch, and something that really fits my life now, is being able to play 10 minutes of a game. See, being able to pick up a games console and instantly be playing that game, that makes a huge difference to me. And I think Paradise Killer is kind of cool like that. It works with how Paradise Killer is thematically, and you know, you have Starlight and you have all these tapes that you pick up and stuff. I feel like the Switch is such a great fit for that idea, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. I actually hadn't even thought about that. Like, a lot of the gaming that I've been doing lately has been either playing Destiny 2 with some friends on PS4 or playing, like, especially in the last couple of weeks, it's been playing this on the Switch. It hasn't really occurred to me, like, if I want to play this game, I can be in playing this game within 5 minutes of touching my Switch. But if I'm going to play something on like the PS4 or anything like that, it's usually like, you know, turn it on, get it up, open the game, let the game load, and like it'll usually take me between 5 and 10 minutes to get on and get connected with friends on Destiny. Whereas like this, like you said, just pick it up and start playing.
I'll often spend my time in this game running around hunting down these, it's basically like your money or currency called blood crystals.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going around hunting these things down, you find them, and you get this like very robotic, intentionally robotic voice that kind of pops in that says,
blood crystal found? Or?
Yeah, blood crystal found or whatever, and it's got like an almost vocoder effect on it, almost like a sound wave from Transformer.
Just gonna say,
yeah, well, that's Starlight's voice. So
yep.
Oh, that's Starlight's voice. Okay,
yep,
now that
Starlight.
makes sense. That makes
You'll
sense.
also notice that the vocoder in Paradise Stay Forever is supposed to be Starlight. So
Oh, okay.
not a lot of people pick up on that because we kind of made it subtle on purpose. But
Yeah,
something snuck in there.
That's
cool.
really cool. Yeah, as you play more, Mike, you'll pick that up because like every time you run into a person, Starlight pops up and gives you like the rundown on like the history of the person. And
yes, that's right. I have talked to a few people
Okay.
in the game, but most of my time has been mostly spent hunting down those crystals and just like kind of exploring. Like
Yep.
It's just a fun game to run around and explore and look and see and not necessarily do as much, but that's just kind of how I am when I play games. I like to explore and find all the little nook and crannies.
Yeah. I did a similar thing in the beginning too, and I will say I am very happy for how like the island is huge for one, but it is not overly huge. Like you can run around it, you can run from one side to the other, and I mean it takes a little while, which is why you have the taxi character and the fast travel points. But I like once you kind of get your bearings, which I'm still not 100% because there are certain areas that are just like I'm not super familiar with, and there's certain areas that I only just recently got to because I was just like, oh, that's how you get there. It's not so large that it's unwieldy. Like once you kind of get your bearings and you're like, okay, the syndicate apartments are here and the civilian apartments are here and stuff like that. You get a couple of like, what do you call them, landmarks, and it's pretty fun to run around in. But especially with all of those save points, which are also fast travel points, I did what you were doing. Like I collected a lot of the blood crystals because I wanted to get all of the different skins for start, because they're different skins that you can purchase, not with real money, but like with the blood crystals, and they're just like overlays. So when you go hit start and you go into your screen to look at all the stuff, it's basically just like a desktop wallpaper behind everything. But there are so many, and they're all really cool. Like the photography or the digital art rather in this game, because I'm not sure if it's like some of the stuff looks like true photography and then it's been like filtered and whatnot, and some of it looks like it might be 3D renderings, but they're all really interesting and really cool. And then you've got things that are just like, the 2D art. Like there are some character backgrounds like Lady Loved Eyes, and there's one that's just like a corgi, and that was one of the first ones I got, and it was really cute.
There's also certain characters that you'll run into aside from like the main characters that you have to investigate or whatever. There's a character named Shinji that you'll find. He's one of the first characters that you kind of interact with, and he's, I don't know, I guess the best way to put it is he's like a demon trickster in a way. He's basically just killing time to sit down and chat with you, and a lot of the stuff that he says is very vague and weird, and that's kind of how the language is in this entire game. It's all very old and new at the same time, and it tries to kind of create its own unique blend of style in terms of the writing. So when you're reading it, it's almost as if everything is overly complicated to be overly complicated, but it's not. It's very hard to explain how characters use the language that they're dealt.
I think the thing is you assume the role of Lady Loved Eyes, and Lady Loved Eyes has lived a full life within this universe. You know, you're in a lot of games you're playing the protagonist who's discovering their own story or discovering the story through themselves. But you know, when you assume the control of Loved Eyes, she has a history with all these people. She knows all these people already. So you know, you finding out all that information is really just part of the process of investigation.
Right.
And that's a big thing for the game, I guess, is player agency and you know, how much of it is actually investigation. And certainly when I was playing Paradise Killer, I feel like you could say everything is investigation on some level, because everything you're doing will ultimately inform your choice when it comes to deciding who done it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. How did you become involved in the Paradise Killer game and creating its soundtrack? Like, were you approached by the developers, or did you like answer a casting call for a composer or anything like that?
I knew the developers prior to this, and I think I wanted to work with them because I knew they were going to be making good stuff. So I think they were working on Paradise Killer for probably about a year before we started having conversations about it, because they just set up their own studio. Yeah, basically they got to a point where they had budget for a soundtrack and wanted to bring me on board. So we had some discussions about what the systems were and how we could make those work. And then really they just gave me a pretty short brief, and I had 6 months to go and come up with everything.
Oh, wow.
The different sources I'm reading online as far as like the game's inspiration was H.P. Lovecraft, Franz Kafka, the novelist or writer, and Danganronpa.
Yeah, it's kind of like partway between like a Phoenix Wright and a visual novel. One of the things, so I haven't played Danganronpa, but I've seen people play them. I don't know if there's like if you can actually fail in Danganronpa. Like I feel like it's more of a visual novel, but I could be wrong. Whereas with Paradise Killer, like that's one of the things that I find really interesting about this game is like you're in full control of the investigation. You can go back to judge at any point and say like, okay, we're having the trial now, regardless of what information or evidence you have. And then from there you have to, like, I haven't done it yet because I'm afraid of starting the trial too soon. But my assumption is like you can start it and then you have to just go with what you have there and make accusations and hold stuff up. So like you can basically accuse anybody and provide evidence and then just kind of go from there. And that's really interesting to know that like there are however many ways this game can end.
Let's get into our next track. Justin, what's your next pick?
All right, so next up we're going to hear a track called Headlights on the Shore. Welcome back. That was Headlights on the Shore from the Paradise Killer game that we are talking about today with composer Barry Epoch Topping. This one, it keeps this really nice groove with the bass line going on there, and then you have like a melody in like the synth in sort of like the beginning middle, or the beginning third of it. Which
weeping synth, you mean?
Yeah, it sounds like I like the quality of the synth, and it sounds really cool. But as you go through, like you've got that, and then at some point you've got like these almost sound like bells or tubular bells, and then like the last portion of the song, it transitions into that guitar, and
yeah.
I don't know if that's a live or a synth guitar, but it sounds like a live electric guitar to me, and it's just really cool to hear this transformation of like kind of synth in the beginning to live at the end, and I don't know, it stands out in many ways, but like the guitar riff, melody, whatever you want to call it, at the end there, I fall into a bass groove a lot with when a song's got a really good bass groove, but the guitar melody in that was just like pulls me in.
Yeah, it's kind of tasteful. Like I'm a big fan of that. So I got a friend of mine, Tom. He played a couple of guitar solos on the soundtrack. He's an amazing guitarist, but this was one of the ones where I sent him the track and I was like, I need a solo, and he smashed it. Which, you know, it's a massive sort of load off when you can send someone like just a small idea in a section of a song, and they can come back with something that you're delighted with.
Yes,
absolutely.
You know, that happened a lot with this soundtrack actually. But yeah, I really like that song because it was one where I was just like, I just programmed, it's like one drum loop for the entire thing. So I wanted it to be bedded by this drum loop, and then just have some like, you know, kind of, I don't want to say sad because it's not necessarily sad, but it's quite an emotional song, I guess, in a kind of 80s way, right? And it has that kind of like Twin Peaks style baritone guitar underneath it and stuff like that.
Twin Peaks is a good comparison with this track.
With
Twin
this game.
Peaks, anything really come from like a mid to late 80s kind of like almost detective show vibe. It reminds me a lot of the soundtrack to like All the Right Moves, the Tom Cruise football movie. You know, that sort of 80s aesthetic, but this feels more like you're searching, which I guess that name, Headlights on the Shore, really kind of gives off the right vibe. That's like the perfect name for a song of this caliber. But I gotta ask, how did you create the music in this game? Was it a kind of a combination of software-based instruments or software-based creation and real instruments? Because that saxophone, for example, in the first track that we listened to, Paradise Stay Forever, sounds like a real saxophone. So what was the mix?
You can't fake sax. Like, even though like virtual instruments have come on a lot, guitar is something you can fake now, but sax, brass is something that's very hard to fake, right?
Right.
So yeah, I wanted to have like a strong mix of real instruments to synthesize instruments, purely just because it, you know, that's what the style was in the 80s and the early 90s. It wasn't all synth, so yeah. But I play quite a lot of instruments too. Like I play bass and a tiny wee bit of drums. I play piano and stuff. So stuff that I could do myself, I was happy to do. But there were a couple of instances. Our sax player, for example, Fabian, and my mate Tom, that played a bunch of guitar solos, are two people that, you know, I would work with on any project. Even if I could play the sax, I would still get Fabian to play saxophone on my tracks because he's an absolute genius.
Right.
It's a pretty big mix of like some kind of workhorse virtual synths that I always go to, and then a bunch of stuff I hadn't used before, some hardware synths, and then some real instruments where appropriate.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Let's jump into our next track. This one is Midori Eyes. And I gotta ask before we start the track, Midori, is that like a reference to the liquor? Like
yes.
Yes. Yeah. At my wedding, Midori sours were the staple drink.
That's probably one of my favorite cocktails is Midori sour. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
I love Midori. That used to be my clubbing cocktail, actually. If I was going to a club, it was either that or a whiskey sour, but usually Midori sours.
Midori has a really negative reputation in Scotland because it's like an old person drink here. I don't know if it's the same
really?
there, but
really?
It's like what pensioners here drink.
Oh wow! No, I think over here it's more considered a, like, not a young person drink, but like it's in the same line as like schnapps. So if it's full of sugar, it's generally what the kids shouldn't be drinking, but it's generally what the younger people drink.
Very cool. Let's get into Midori Eyes by Barry Topping off the Paradise Killer soundtrack. Thanks for joining us back on our Paradise Killer Spotlight. That track was called Midori Eyes, and again by the composer who we are talking to, Barry Topping. Midori Eyes, this definitely gives me a laid-back funk vibe, if such a thing is possible. That bass line is straight up funk, you know, the do, you know, just like fun and funky, but also very laid back, very chill and relaxed at the same time, especially when that piano kind of comes in, the dun 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 dun. If you sped this track up, it would probably be a really good like late 80s dance tune, but the fact that it's slowed down and kind of more at ease, it gives you a really good way to kind of explore the track while you're exploring the island. So it gets definitely a good selection from me.
Yeah, it's kind of loungy. I think it fits with the vibe, because for large parts of Paradise Killer you're outdoors and basically the beach, right? It's one giant beach,
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel this is quite like a beachy lounge, beach bar kind of tune, which I like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is actually the most recent track that I found. When I was playing last night, I'd say about an hour or so before I was done, I was up in the mountains, I think somewhere, and found Midori Eyes, and then I obviously put it on, and it's basically all I listened to for the last portion of what I've been playing, just because it's so chill.
That's cool.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when we're talking about finding the tracks, when you're running around the island just exploring and finding new things, you'll come across these, I don't know, I guess like posts in the ground, and they're
like broadcast towers.
Yeah. And when you go up to them, you could select them, and then they'll ask, you know, here's the track that, you know, you can listen to, and then you add it to your playlist basically. And you can use the D-pad to go left or right to choose which track you want to listen to. So if you have a particular favorite, you can kind of scroll through. With it having a more roulette style, it kind of fits in more in line with like something like Grand Theft Auto or you know, Saints Row, or one of those kind of sandboxy kind of style games where you can just scroll through the radio and pick which track you want. The only difference is that in this game, of course, it's all original composition, not licensed music. Yeah. So
it's more kind of world building as well, because you know this music it's real music that exists within the Paradise Killer universe that you're finding and listening to on Starlight. So I feel like it just helps flesh out the world a bit more, having this real music that exists in this game.
Yeah, absolutely.
We never really think about game music as something that exists in the game, right? I mean, kind of classic video game music is it just plays while you're doing stuff. Like, where's that music coming from? Like, that Donkey Kong Country music, like, is that playing out a speaker? What's happening there?
Right.
But in Paradise Killer, in the PC version as well, you can choose to have the music play back from the island's speaker system.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there's speakers like all over the islands that you can hear.
Yeah, so that becomes even more diegetic. I mean, the music's already diegetic, but it becomes, you know, you can broadcast it from these objects that exist in the same physical 3D space that the player character does.
That's a really good point about listening to music in games. Like, where's the music coming from? Like, you mentioned Donkey Kong Country, and I kind of feel like if Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong heard the music like while they were playing the game, or while they were in the game, I feel like they would just freak out because, you know, they're monkeys or they're gorillas or whatever. So, well,
you could say that though. Yeah. If they were riding a rhino, they would freak out because they're monkeys.
Right? Yeah, that's true.
I don't want to get people thinking about this. I don't want to get people into headspace where they're playing an 8-bit video game, going, man, where is this music coming from?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's more just about how in Paradise Killer we very much want it to be like, here is the music, it exists. It's your music, do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, I do think that's really cool how that was implemented. I don't think I realized that you could do things with the towers other than like grab the music from them. I didn't realize you could actually broadcast. I always just assumed that Lady Love Dies was like got like one headphone on or got her headphones on while she's doing stuff. Because like the music is explicitly like this music exists in the world. And one of the other things that I thought was really cool, I noticed it a while ago. Whenever you hit the pause button to bring up Starlight's menus and traverse the computer, the music does like a slowdown thing, like as if you were slowing down and stopping a record. And then when you come out of the menu, it does the opposite. Like you hear it go and like ramp up. And every time I hear it, it's just like, I don't know, it's really cool, and it makes me smile.
we just felt like it was important that, given that we had the pick up the music as collectible system, and also like I said, on PC you can play it back from the speaker towers. You know, the music was it's a focus from a development point of view. You know, from a sort of cornerstone part of the audio implementation is this music is diegetic within this world. And
Right.
yeah, it's good to work on something where music is such a focus.
Cool. What's your history with video games? Because you mentioned that, you know, you wanted to become a game composer for music for the games. What is your own personal history with video games, if any?
I grew up playing platform games, were always my favourite, and then I got a bit older, and then JRPGs became my favourite thing. And then when I got older, I just kind of got into everything, but I'd still say my favourites now are, it tends to be games that have a big focus on the music, which might seem obvious, but I really love, like, I think sort of Konami's 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit arcade output, the sort of take the whole of the 90s and the early 2000s. I think everything Konami was doing is incredible. I love when music in games moved over from being like sound chip stuff over to Red Book audio, so like Sega CD and PC Engine CD, stuff like that. I think there's so much good music from that time. So in a way, like, how I feel about games and how I feel about music, it's really linked. Like, video games are a personal experience for everyone, but for me, especially with a game where I love the music, those are all my favorites.
That era is just so treasured, and it's just so depressing thinking back now to where things are. There's definitely a resurgence in a focus on video game music, at least from the indie side, kind of like the indie all the way up to like maybe the like AA developers, if you will, like the way forwards, like those types of development teams and publishing teams. But when it comes to like AAA games, I feel like a lot of them have kind of lost that balance. I think Nintendo is still one of the few companies that is putting out video game music where it's like, you know, there is a big focus on music being an important part of the game, and, you know, just to not make a game that just sounds like, you know, generic action movie or generic like symphonic movie music that they're doing nowadays with a lot of franchises. But it's a game like this that kind of reinvigorates that interest in modern games, where you can listen to a soundtrack like Paradise Killer and be like, you know what, this brings me back to listening to stuff on Sega CD or that Red Book audio, in stuff like the PC Engine with stuff like Rondo of Blood and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that was definitely the aim, and I think the thing that's cool is all these songs there's very little incidental music in Paradise Killer. So all these songs are kind of standalone songs, and a lot of them, even though they're all stylistically quite similar, a lot of them have no common elements. Normally with a game soundtrack, you know, you have the same kick sound, the same snare sound,
right?
That kind of thing, right? But yeah, I think it's cool that I got to do this. Is really the soundtrack comes out like a double album almost.
Yeah,
like it's a thing that can stand separately from the game, which is again was one of our aims. So really happy we managed to do that.
Nice.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Let's get into our next track, which is Justin's pick. What do you got for us?
All right. So we are going to listen to 8th Street Rose from Paradise Killer by Barry. welcome back. That was 8th Street Rose from the Paradise Killer soundtrack by our guest, Barry Topping. Mike, what do you think about that one?
That was fun. I really like the guitar in that. It's funny because I listen to, generally when we record episodes like this, I listen to tracks privately just because, listening to it over the airwaves when you play through it on your computer, you can hear it, but it's not like, it sometimes sounds a little faded, a little fuzzy sometimes. Yeah. But like, I listened to the track and then as we came back, you were still listening and the sound of it almost made it sound like it was faded a little bit, and it had this warm kind of 80s aesthetic to it just by listening to it through that method. So not that I'm encouraging everybody to jump on and like listen to music in that essence, like streaming music and listening to it that way, but like,
is this a new genre where people are going to produce music so it sounds like it's being played over a bad
right
connection?
Yeah, that's going to be like the next thing. Yeah, but I mean, like in other tracks that you've done on this soundtrack, for example, like Lady Blue, which we'll be listening to next, that has that aesthetic too, that vaporwave kind of like warbly kind of VHS kind of design kind of baked into the track. And when I listened to 8th Street Rose through that method that we were just listening to it does give off like as if you're listening to it on a radio that's really far away and you're driving down the highway while listening to it, like somebody's holding a speaker while you're driving and they're playing it off of like a little boombox instead of playing it through the car speakers. So it was cool. It was a neat aesthetic.
Cool. I was just gonna say it's quite a 70s idea, that tune. Like it kind of moves in a quite a 70s way, but it has a big 80s drum production on it.
Yeah, the drums are 80s, and the track with that piano and the mix of the guitar kind of gives off a more early 80s aesthetic and feel. Again, like a post-disco city pop, not quite like fully city pop era, but more like something like REO Speedwagon or, something that you listen to from those early 80s bands that they were doing it only during that period of time that you could like lock a track like this down to.
I think this is one of the songs that when I was writing, I felt like could easily be a vocal track. Like a lot of these tracks were written to be, originally a lot of the songs looped, which is why they have kind of similar structures, a lot of them, which is kind of A, B, and then they would have looped. So for a lot of the songs, it's kind of, it'll go through the whole, the A section, the B section, then it'll repeat the A section, the B section with variations. And then
right.
That was largely to do because, for a long time into the project, all the music looped. And yeah, when I was writing them, I was kind of writing them like they could be vocal songs. And 8th Street Rose is one, House of Bliss is another one. Wouldn't take a lot for me to turn them into vocal songs. So.
Yeah, there's some tracks that I just can't picture having vocals, like Lady Blue, for example. But like some of the more chill tracks, like Headlights on the Shore, Breeze with You, those always felt to me like those shouldn't have vocals in them. But the more kind of upbeat jazzy kind of tracks like Paradise, Stay Forever, House of Bliss, like you said, those tracks to me easily could fit vocals on top of them to kind of add a whole nother layer onto them.
Yeah, so I really liked the sort of the driving force behind this song, which is that kind of da 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 da, da, and the way that it kept going and like kept everything moving. It kind of gave the song more energy in my mind than some of the other songs that are a bit more like laid back or chill. Which, but it did it without being like frenetic or anything like that. Like it wasn't like stressful or like running around or anything like that. It was more like just still chill, but with a little bit more energy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
The piano idea was the first part of it that I wrote. I mean, that's obviously why it's the driving force. But I'm not a great pianist, but that's one of the tunes that I can actually play on piano. So I had a very good time recording that stuff because it's just such a like you said, it's got energy to it. It has a bit of bounce to it. It's quite a driving song. So. Yeah.
How long did it take you to do this soundtrack? Like weeks, months?
I think it was 6 months of fairly solid work. This composition isn't my primary job. Like I'm a video editor, so I did this in I don't want to say my spare time because I had to take some time off to work on it. But it's pretty much like 6 months complete work with a wee bit of work on either end for demoing, and then some stuff after for nailing down mixes. But yeah, pretty much all 24 tracks in 6 months is how I like to look at it.
Wow. Very cool. Let's get into our next pick. Speaking of Lady Blue, this is Lady Blue, again, off of the Paradise Killer soundtrack, and it's composed by our guest of honor, Barry Epoch Topping. Thanks for joining us back on Paradise Killer, the composer who we have here in the hot seat, Barry Topping. And that track was Lady Blue, a very vaporwave aesthetic track, vaporwave future funk era, which is a more modern take on the older type of city pop type music that was coming out of the 80s. I love this track. It's one of my favorites on the soundtrack, and it's just such a groovy, fun track to listen to and vibe out to. It's, of course, got those VHS aesthetics that I was talking about earlier, where it's almost as if the whole track becomes out of focus, especially towards the middle part of the track, right before it kind of builds back up, and then that new lead synth kind of comes in and brightens up the track. It's a real force to listen to. What did you think of this one, Justin?
Yeah, so I mean, it also does that right in the beginning too. Like the first 10 or so seconds of the song sound like kind of like what you were saying in the last track, where it sounds like it's being played on like a radio or a boombox that's a few feet away from you, and then it kind of comes in full force, which is awesome. So Vaporwave is something that I didn't really know much about until a lot more recently, and it's another fantastic genre of music that I really like, and I don't have a lot of experience with. I would say if anybody is listening to this and is also not really familiar with Vaporwave, I would direct you to YouTube. There is a channel called Down the Rabbit Hole, and they have a video where they kind of deep dive in Vaporwave, like where it came from. Like,
I love that channel.
You do?
Yeah. I love Down the Rabbit Hole.
Yeah, there's so many.
They do great stuff, and the Vaporwave video is one of the best videos in my opinion. Agreed.
That as well as the Final Fantasy VII house. That's
yes.
That's a really weird video too. But go and there's a follow up as well. Like he has videos that are like my mistakes and stuff, and I think he does have a couple things that he clarifies from the Vaporwave video. But regardless, like if you're not familiar with it, go check that channel out and watch that video, because I thought it was a really good explanation and just a really interesting thing to see. But this one, much like everything else that we've heard, like I really like the bass, and like the bass in this sounds like fat, if that makes any sense at all. Just like,
oh, for sure.
Yeah. And I really like the quality on that bass, and then just the rest of the track is just like everything else, so smooth. And it's funny you were saying that there's not a lot of like things that link these tracks, but I feel like for as much as you do a lot of different things and like you try out some different styles and whatnot, there is a feel to this soundtrack that is cohesive, or at the very least to me, just the way that they're produced and the smoothness of a lot of your tracks really bring it all together for me. So I had no complaints.
Cool. It's interesting. I've seen a lot of people describing Paradise Killer as a vaporwave game with a vaporwave soundtrack. I never really set out to make the soundtrack vaporwave. This was the only track where I was like, I'm gonna make a vaporwave track.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of cool that, I think it's cool that people are like, oh, this is a vaporwave soundtrack.
I think when people say that it's a vaporwave soundtrack, what they really mean is it's a nostalgic soundtrack, because it sounds like music that you heard before that didn't come out back then. So it brings about a nostalgia for the 80s and 90s and even the late 70s in certain aspects. And for the 90s, probably like really early 90s, I would say. But most of the aesthetic falls in the early to late 80s, particularly the early to mid 80s, in my opinion. But no, I agree with you. The rest of the tracks don't really give off an entirely like vaporwave, future funk kind of aesthetic. It's this track specifically that, to me, like as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, that's vaporwave, knowing what vaporwave kind of sounded like. Especially the big giveaway is that fading sound where it sounds really far away. I'm not sure the technical term.
Yeah, I mean the whole middle section is just turn the big filter knob. I really love Filter House, so there's a couple of good filter bits in this soundtrack that I was kind of happy with. But yeah, there's so much power in slowing down a track, right? Because this is a track that I wrote at full tempo. It's 128 BPM, and it's quite like a poppy, upbeat, dancey tune. And then you smack a big tape stretch on it, and it's like becomes so aggressive. Like it's smooth, yeah, but when you stretch out the space that the kick and the sort of aggressive bass tone has to occupy there, is just makes it huge. So that I was really happy how this turned out, because this tune had a couple of incarnations, and I scrapped it and started again with all new sounds, and then you never really know how it's going to sound until you slow it down. But through some messing around, I was really happy how it came out. Yeah, smooth, but I feel like this is quite an aggressive track compared to a lot of the others, just in terms of how it fills out the stereo spectrum. Yeah.
Let's get into the next pick, which is your pick, Justin. What do you got for us?
Okay, so this is going to be called, very simply, The Plateau, from the Paradise Killer soundtrack. right. That was The Plateau from Paradise Killer, as composed by Barry Topping. And this was a lot shorter than some of the other stuff that we've been playing. This one was like 2 3/4 minutes versus a lot of the others are about 4.5. But in that time, it just, for when it gets to the point, I feel like this one, I don't want to call it minimalist, because like I do feel like there's a lot going on, but I feel like there's a lot less instrumentally here than there is in some of the other ones.
Yeah, I won't spoil it too much, but Sarcophagus is one of 2 tracks that takes place out with the playlist system. So there are 2 areas, well, there are a few areas, but for the 2 tracks that we're going to talk about, the plateau happens when you reach an area where you're disconnected from your music system, and this is actual traditional music that plays in an area in a video game. So I wanted to make it quite different because it has to match the area where you are, because it's quite a unique area, but also it has to be different from the rest of the songs in the soundtrack, because for you to have control of your soundtrack system taken away, you want it to be quite a big change. If they took away control of the soundtrack system and it's like another New Jack Swing tune, it might be a bit like, oh, alright, why have they done that? But yeah, this is quite a minimalist tune that has just kind of that throbbing bass and then some piano. I was saying something that you may not have picked up on is that the plateau shares a melodic theme with Lady Blue, in the same way that another track we're going to talk about, the Sarcophagus, shares a melodic theme with Paradise Stay Forever, which is because even though Paradise Stay Forever is the theme of the game, to me Lady Blue is Loved Eyes theme in a way, never explicitly stated, but it's a song that I associate with the character Loved Eyes. So I wanted to make sure that that B melodic part from that tune was replicated somewhere else, and I ended up putting it in the plateau, just because I quite like conceptual continuity throughout a soundtrack, in the same way that the plateau has that kind of 16th note throbbing bass thing. The Sarcophagus, which is another track we're going to talk about, also has that throbbing bass thing. So it's just small ways to tie tracks together when they have, a narrative context for it. You'll also notice the plateau, the Sarcophagus. Yeah. They have similar titles because they're similar areas and how they relate to the soundtrack.
Specific locations that you're visiting, right?
Yeah.
Or events that are transpiring. So it seems like you've got a really good lockdown in terms of how this soundtrack relates to the game, since you were working in terms of the game's aesthetic and vibe through the music. How would you compare working on a game like this to maybe like previous soundtracks that you worked on? Because I saw that you had a couple of soundtracks on your Bandcamp. How do those projects relate?
I had a lot of freedom on this project. We knew at the start we had the brief, which was that we wanted a city pop inspired soundtrack, but beyond that I really had carte blanche to do whatever I want. We had a set number of tracks. This is how many tracks we're going to use for the soundtrack system. This is how many tracks we need for other stuff. I was really left to come up with the styles I wanted to incorporate and how they supported the narrative and the sort of world building of the game, which is not something you normally get to do, because I've worked on, like, for example, I'll take another game I worked on, Jack Be Nimble, which is like an 8-bit endless runner game, which has a Game Boy visual style. So the brief was, we want kind of 8-bit style music, and it was an endless runner, so it all has to have a certain tempo to it. So you have a lot of freedom in terms of writing the music there, but stylistically and dynamic wise, you don't. So Paradise Killer was really just me sitting down at the piano and just coming up with whatever I wanted. And there's a lot of power in that. It was a lot of freedom. And I think it led to being able to work quickly. Like I said, 6 months. Not just quickly work economically. So I'd come up with an idea and pass it over to Kaizen, and they would approve it or not. And I think, one idea got knocked back. So the rest of the time it was just me sending over 4 bars of a tune and them going, sounds good. And then I could go away and turn it into a complete song.
That's really cool. Like, not only did you have like a lot of creative freedom, but it also sounds like you and Kaizen were more or less in sync. Like you'd send them something and they're just like, yep, nope, like this is what we're looking for.
Right.
Yeah, I think they trusted me, and I definitely trusted them. Like, I trusted their vision for the game, and I trusted them to know that what I was doing was going to support their vision for the game. So, yeah, no complaints there.
Nice.
The plateau, to me at least, sounded like something that you'd hear, since you had mentioned Red Book Audio and Konami, Snatcher. Sounded like something that you would be investigating to, or driving around, looking around for something in a game like Snatcher, or maybe Police Knots. That's the vibe that I got.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's kind of, it doesn't go full synthwave. Like, I didn't want it to be big Blade Runner style, but it
Sure.
has that kind of, just, yeah, that throbbing bass that is evocative of synthwave, but yeah, it's maybe a little more thoughtful. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because I have an entire album of synthwave tunes, but...
Right.
Right.
Let's get into a jam. This is the Megaton Bop by our composer, Barry Topping. You're back. That was the Megaton Bop. What a track by our composer, Barry Topping. This is total New Jack Swing, and I love it. I love the resurgence of New Jack Swing music from the early 90s, late 80s. This was Motown Philly style with that really hard-hitting, punchy snare and just a fat bass groove, funky bass groove, and those just really strong synth hits. And the nice thing about this track is it still has room to evolve, which it does, and it kind of brings in this lead melody that kind of flourishes like throughout the middle section of the track. It's just a phenomenal song.
Oh, thank you. This was I had the bass line written for this for ages because I knew I wanted to do a New Jack Swing song.
Nice.
And I just couldn't get the samples to sit right, and then I bought it was like a New Jack Swing sample collection, and it had like a really amazing snare sample in it, and that was it. And then the song just appeared. And it's amazing how like tiny little things like that can just sort you out. That's what I was saying about working economically. Is I've really tried to limit the number of synths I was using when we were making this soundtrack, because you can get bogged down in sound design, and even before that it's just scrolling through presets, which is not something I'm a big fan of. So yeah, I really wanted to make sure we had a narrow focus so we could work economically. So this is a song that took a while to come together, but when I finally sort of hit upon the eureka moment, yeah, it came together so quickly. And it's such a short tune as well. I think it's under 3 minutes, but
yeah, it's 2.5. Yeah,
that's all it needs.
Gets the job done for sure.
It's interesting because it still has that nostalgic vibe and era, especially with those synth hits that are like a dead giveaway, like pretty much encapsulates like this is the early 90s, this is the late 80s. But even so, with artists coming back around to that era that they grew up in, it's definitely the sound that everyone during that era that was watching MTV and VH1 and, all that stuff that was really growing up on. And a lot of game composers from that era also grew up on that type of music, like the Yuzo Koshiros of the world, who were, listening to dance music and electronic and EDM music back then in the day. And I kind of feel like a lot of that is a resurgence of what's happening now, where you get a lot of artists such as yourself who are like, yeah, that era was really cool. It's really cool to see that style come back in with newer game composers. It's also interesting, though, because when game composers were rating music from the late 80s, early 90s, that era, the music for the most part stayed around that time period. Like, the stuff that you were listening to on the radio was the same stuff that you were hearing in modern game music during that era. And after Red Book Audio kind of took off, everything really shifted into making things sound more like movies and less like the music of the times that we are in.
I think game music has its own strengths that are unique from radio music. I think when you get into radio, I think people feel too strongly about what they consider to be pastiche.
Yeah.
I feel like pastiche is used negatively about a lot of stuff. And it's not fair in video games, especially because video games have such a rich history of great music, and why shouldn't people draw on that to make new music? The idea that music is not new because it sounds like other music is not something that I subscribe to. It's like some of my favourite songs ever are like ripped off from other people's songs. I'm not even talking about stuff that's ripped off, but stylistically things that are similar.
Sure.
It shouldn't be a bad thing. You shouldn't be afraid to take what you love about old music and turn it into your music. I think that's more acceptable within video games because retro gaming especially is so tied into music, right? Like I was saying about PC Engine and stuff like that. A lot of people don't realise that Red Book Audio from Japanese game developers for PC Engine, stuff like that, for arcade games at that time, this is basically jazz fusion, right? So much of that stuff is jazz fusion, a genre that was deeply, deeply uncool in massive parts of the world. And I think if people were just willing to approach stuff with fresh ears sometimes, I think they get a lot more enjoyment out of it. Because there's what is new, right? What is new? I'm not someone either who thinks music is crap now. Like, there's good music throughout history. There's bad music throughout history. And there will continue to be good and bad music. And it's more just about, as a composer, like, I do what I want to do. I'm not really trying to do stuff because I think it's cool. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of this stuff is cool to me, but it's just the stuff I want to be writing. And I think video game composers are lucky in a way because they are writing for people who I think are more willing to be open to hearing stuff, right?
That's true. Yeah, especially, looking at the bleeps and bloops of the chiptune era of 8-bit and 16-bit music, and, to see that evolve into Red Book Audio. I think when you make that evolutionary kind of audible path, you, in a way, kind of understand the compositions behind the music. That's why when you listen to something that's like 8-bit, like something of the Konami era or Capcom or whatever, you could be like, oh, is that like Latin or is that jazz? Or that aspect for retro game music is so ingrained in composition and breakdown of this sounds like something that could be so much more. And now that we have the capacity and capabilities to do so much more, you still find all these people returning to that era and that sound. But even so, when you have a soundtrack such as this that's very eclectic and very different, it kind of stands the test of time in a way, while it relies a little bit on nostalgia, but it also creates something new for people to listen to. So that's a good point.
That's cool. That was exactly what I wanted to do. My mission statement for this was to take familiar sounds, classic sounds, and try and create new arrangements, new sort of slants on. To me, this is jazz fusion in its own way. Like, this is a fusion soundtrack, but it's just mine in some different places than what jazz fusion traditionally does.
And even jazz fusion, like in the aspect of what you were talking about with jazz fusion, yeah, it was really popular in the 70s, and then in the 80s it kind of became uncool, especially in like North America, UK, to listen to. In Japan, they were still listening to a lot of that like jazz fusion music. It's just cool to see Japan kind of evolve and be like, whatever, we're just gonna listen to the music that we want to listen to. You know, who cares what era it came from? It's awesome and it's melodic and it's hip and it's cool, to us at least.
That's it. That's the only thing that I can say, you know, that you should be taking through every facet of your life, is just do what you're interested in, like what you like, and try not to worry about it. Just, you know, if it's something that you're interested in, if it's what you wanted to make, then that's your art. Go for it. The idea that it's not your art because it's not 100% original, or because it's a derivative of something else, is even derivative is like a word with negative connotations. But
yeah, I use that word occasionally, but I hate using it because, like, I truly believe that there's nothing that isn't derivative of something. Like, even if you are creating something that's completely from your own mind, there are things that have influenced your life that make whatever it is derivative of something else. So, like, I hate using the word, but I get where you're coming from.
All right, we got way too deep into music. Let's kind of branch it out. Let's go to the Sarcophagus, which is Justin. This is your final pick, right?
Yeah. So we got two more left. So we're gonna hear another one of these area type themes. This is gonna be the Sarcophagus from Paradise Killer by Barry Topping. Let's give it a listen. All right, welcome back. That was my last pick of the episode. We got Mike's up next, but this was the Sarcophagus. This one gave me some like real synthwave vibes. I'm not sure if that was particularly on purpose, but the droning bass line that you have going on there reminds me of some of the stuff that I've been listening to by like Carpenter Brute and whatnot more recently. So those are tracks that I really enjoyed. So just the piano and the synths that went on through this one were very, very soft and nice.
Again, I won't spoil it, but this is for an area that's quite not very nice. And originally the music we had for it was kind of sad, I would say, but I decided that I wanted something oppressive. So we have this like really fat bass sound, which is kind of synthwavy. It's like a layer of a bass that I would use for something synthwavy, but with something more distorted. And like this really fat, dead snare sound that I'm also a big fan of. And I just wanted it to be like claustrophobic and kind of oppressive until it reaches that point where it opens out, and then when it opens out, that's a recurrent melodic theme from Paradise Stay Forever, which is again ties it back to the theme of the island, the theme of the game. While you're in an area where you have no control over your soundtrack system, it's like not a reminder, but it's a callback to all this other music and all these other themes.
Right.
That area is important to the story,
almost like a motif in a way.
They're motifs, I'd say so.
This is the area that's completely enclosed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I found it by accident. It's not like you're not supposed to be there or anything, but like I do a lot of exploring when I play, and I was like, oh, what's this? Then what's this? And oh my God, where am I?
True investigator.
Yeah. It was really cool getting in there and just doing like exploring in that area, and then learning more about what actually happened there and how it relates to everything else.
Yeah, I think when it changes to the sort of non-diegetic music to the, you have no soundtrack, I think that adds to the impact of you've found something important. Yeah.
One of the first things that I'd noticed was like the track that I was listening to previous was probably like Go-Go Style or something, and I was like, so I know the like it'll like randomly go through stuff, but I'm like, I don't remember hearing this before. This sounds new, and I didn't even realize that that Starlight wasn't playing my playlist or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite ominous.
Yeah,
you really nailed the oppressive vibe of this track with that really thick bass and very dark tones, much darker than anything I think we've heard throughout the entire soundtrack. And the callback to Paradise, I was a little worried initially because that's such a light kind of fun track that I was worried that the dichotomy of Sarcophagus would kind of make it sound like not jokey, but like make it sound like it shouldn't fit. But it fit really well, and I think a large part of that is because a lot of the more like light, happy kind of tones that are in Paradise that kind of make it a fun, funky track were very subdued here. It was more like slowed down, and it just felt more baked in, like almost like to an aesthetics purpose.
I think it ties into the themes of the game, where on the surface level it's a very superficial vaporwavy world with all these fantastically dressed people who've committed some pretty serious genocidal crimes, right?
Yeah.
There's a dark heart to Paradise Killer, and even Paradise Stay Forever is not a complete light and sunshine song. Like lyrically, it has quite a dark heart too. So I thought it kind of would fit to bring this theme that you associate with we're having a nice time on the beach, listen to this tune with you're in a very bad place and you're having a bad time.
There's a lot of really interesting looking characters throughout this game. I mean, there's a ton of variety here, and
shout out to Gigalithic, our incredible character designer.
Yeah, like really fantastic job here, and they've covered all the visual styles or aesthetics that you would want present in a modern game. It's got the more gamey type atmosphere type characters. Like there's a character who's like just a giant red skeleton basically with sunglasses.
Sam.
You know what I mean? And then there's like characters with masks. There's characters that are, kind of like scantily clad, but like in their own way it works for them really well. There's characters that look like they have priest hats on, like those long brimmed priest hats kind of style, or like rabbi hats. There's characters that look kind of like vaporwavy, people of all different races, which is cool to see. And even like the lead, Lady Love Dies, she doesn't look like the typical action hero, or like even like a character that you would see in like a visual novel as a lead. A lot of the visual novels that were coming out in Japan, for example, there was a very specific anime style that they would have, and they would have like super tiny waists and huge breasts and giant eyes, and they had that anime aesthetic. And here you've got a character who's a little bit overweight and still looks really cool. She looks like a badass chick. You know what I mean? So it's nice that you see characters of all shapes and sizes in this game, and so it's nice to see something like that.
I think it's good that in a game so fantastical, it has a pretty realistic cast of characters, far more realistic than a lot of other video games.
That's true.
But it just goes to show that there's no excuse, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I really like all the personality that they've given to the characters. Like, there's the doctor that you talk to. His name is Dr. Doom Jazz, and for one, I love that name. But for two, he's just he's cocky. He's I'd probably classify him as horny, because he's constantly trying to get Lady Loved Eyes to come on in and hang out for a while. He's really funny. If I remember correctly, I think he actually has a Scottish voice, or is it you? Is it really?
It is me.
Oh my god!
As Doom Jazz's voice actor, I can confirm that he is a horny character.
That is hilarious. I hadn't seen the voice cast. I did not realize that you were his voice. That is fantastic.
You're going to realize now when you play it. Now you're going to be like, haha.
But
I know who that is.
I like his character though. He was the first person that I ended up coming in contact with, because I was exploring and I ended up falling into the sea, and I was spawned on the docks, and I was like, oh, there's a guy. I'll go talk to him. But I've come back to talk to him so many times, because for one, he's interesting. For two, I just keep finding a lot of things that are like, oh, I need to go talk to Dr. Doom Jazz about things that I've found or information that I've gotten. But all the characters have very distinct personalities, and I like the voice acting that they have, the handful of lines that'll come up. But just one of the characters, Yuri Knight, clearly doesn't like you, and almost every voice line that comes up, he calls you a freak. There's what's her name, Akiko, who calls you something in her native tongue. I think she's Romanian. And
she's Romanian.
Yeah, and she uses this word so often that I was like, I gotta look this up. And then I was sorry that I looked it up, because it is a really, really rude thing to call somebody. But it's so cool, and I haven't really gotten anybody that doesn't like Lady Loved Eyes to be particularly nice to her, so I don't know if they change, or if these relationships really evolve, or if it's just these people really hate you and you're gonna have to really press them to get information out of them, or what. But it's a really well thought out cast of characters.
Yeah.
Credit to Ollie, our creative director. I think he has a
man.
vision, and I think he executed it. So
for that sort of thing with characters that just won't talk to you, or kind of give you the cold shoulder, Yuri Knight was really, really cool. That's the one who has the hat. Rabbi hat.
Yeah.
And wearing sleeves but no shirt, and then just jeans or whatever. Crimson Acid was another cool character.
I like her.
She's really cool. Yeah, she's got this I don't know, hot pink kind of jumpsuit showing off cleavage, and a ram head sort of thing.
Goat, yeah, it's a goat head.
Or a goat head, right? So that was really cool. Let's get into our final track, which is To the Heart. And this is my final pick for Paradise Killer. And again, the composition was by Barry Topping. That was our final pick, To the Heart, from the game of today's topic for episode 70, Paradise Killer. And again, the composer is with us chatting. Barry, Epoch, or Epoch, depending on where you're from. Topping.
I'm very close to dropping Epoch. I'm in that weird phase where I'm transitioning from my artist name to my real name. So next time you talk to me, it's going to be gone. So don't worry about it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. To the Heart sounds to me, at least in the beginning, it reminds me of a Final Fantasy track for whatever reason. You know, that dun 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 dun. It kind of reminded me of like something that you'd hear in like a victory format. Like you did it, you beat the game, here's your end credits theme, or like, you know, something that kind of rolls into this really fun but very congratulatory vibe. That's kind of how I took it. But then I really love the callback to the Paradise Stay Forever track with the saxophone, and then of course having the guitar solo match that main melody from this track in the beginning was really cool.
Yeah, that melody played on its own is kind of weird, right? It does sound very like it's quite an upbeat thing.
Yeah.
But then I put the chords underneath it, and like when I settled on that chord sequence, it gives it it's like more of a kind of theme for that song, really. Which when I knew that I wanted like a big sax solo and a big guitar solo, so I kind of based it around those three sections that are each going to go back to the head melody at the end. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm obviously happy with all these tracks, but this was one when I got the sax solo and the guitar solo in there, I was like, yes.
Yeah, yes. They really bring out a lot of energy to the track.
Tom and Fabian, both amazing players. Tom especially on this track, the guitar solo is no mean feat.
Yeah.
I'm particularly impressed just with the saxophone solo. I don't listen to a whole lot of sax. I mean, outside of maybe when I'm listening to anything jazzy, but like the sax player here has a lot of skill, and so were the solos improvised by those folks, or did you have something written out that you were like, hey, can you make this work?
It varies. On some, it was a case of me sending over a couple of phrases or an idea and being like, reinterpret this however you want, and in other cases it was, you know, just do whatever. And a lot of cases, especially with the sax, Fabian would do stuff based off my ideas, then he would kind of do some of his own, and I would just end up comping together the bits that I like the most.
That's really cool.
Yeah, there are bits where there's, for example, at the end of one of our songs, Ego 24/7, there's like a wee saxophone run. There's one at the end of this as well, which were just parts that I picked out of other solo takes.
Okay.
But kind of dropped them in there, rather than explicitly being like, I need you to write, you know, 2 bars for the end of this song. It's just having, you know, the amount of takes I did means that I could cut up stuff that I liked and fit it around what was best for the song.
Right.
So that's a really cool way of working when you're working with musicians that you trust enough to give you a whole bunch of usable stuff. It just makes it so much easier.
That's awesome. Oh wow, I did not know it was that in depth. That's really cool to be able to do that.
It's cool, like I said, just having ideas. I'd write something on guitar and I'd get Fabian to record it on sax just to see if it translated well, and in some cases I would use it, in other cases I wouldn't use it. So it was really just about having more than I needed and then editing it down to whatever was the best fit for the song.
Yeah.
So now we come to the point of the episode where we pick our favorite tracks, which is going to be very, very difficult because there's so much good music in the soundtrack. And of course, if you liked what you heard here, go check out the Bandcamp with the full soundtrack. It's on Kaizen Gameworks Bandcamp. So Justin, we're going to let our guest go first. Normally I let Justin go first because I'm that kind of guy, but no, we're going to let our guest go first. Of these picks, what would be your favorite?
Of the songs that we have listened to here, I'd say To the Heart is probably my favorite because it's just a simple, straight ahead city pop groove for most of it, right? It's like that classic kind of city pop bass pattern. But that, like you were saying, that wee head melody, I think lifts it a wee bit, and then I think having, frankly, ridiculous guitar solo, sax solo combo is what elevates it into. I feel like if I was letting people listen to, you know, tracks to best describe the soundtrack, it'd probably be Paradise Stay Forever, Go-Go Style, or To the Heart. But To the Heart was probably the one I had the most fun mixing, so it has the most special place in my heart of these, I would say.
Cool. Justin?
I don't know. I'm stuck sort of between Paradise Stay Forever, because I mean it's a rockin' song. Midori Eyes, which is a lot of fun, and what did you call it? The Megaton Bop.
Megaton Bop.
I'm glad you said Midori Eyes, because there are a couple of tracks when I was writing them, I was thinking like, oh, this is a good track, but it's not going to be anyone's favourite.
Oh, no, I
not
really,
that I show
really
favoritism
do.
to any of my tracks, of course, but it's good to hear that you like that tune.
Yeah, no, I really do like it. Like I said, that's the track that I picked up most recently in game, and like it came on, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna actually keep playing this one for a while, because I was just really enjoying, like it helped with the atmosphere of where I was in the story. So yeah, I think
that's a funny thing about that tune that I didn't mention is that I was saying we have different players doing kind of bits of lead in that, but Midori Eyes is one of the tracks where I played all the solos. So I played the synth solo, and then the guitar solo, and then the organ solo. It's weird to think about that. Like, you never think about what the composer's actually doing, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, I guess if I ever played this while live band, I would need 3 of myself.
Oh, that's really awesome. Okay, I think that
funny,
seals
man.
it. I think that's going to be my pick then, Midori Eyes, for sure.
Nice.
I did push into that a wee bit, I feel like. So.
That's okay.
That's fine.
It's okay. I'm not going to argue.
The first track I heard off of this soundtrack was Paradise Stay Forever, of course, because it's right at the top. It's the very first track that you pick. And because I heard, as I said before, I heard this soundtrack way before I played the game. But you know that when a soundtrack is good to the point where like you're sitting there and you're going, I have to play this game now. That the soundtrack hooked me into playing the game. So that's not an easy feat to do, but I think that this soundtrack was my favorite soundtrack of 2020, along with Slayin' 2 by Norin Rad, Matt Creamer. So those were my 2 of games that came out last year. Those are the 2 that were on rotation, probably the most frequent.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Paradise Stay Forever is going to be my pick just because I think that those vocals really hooked me. You know, I love vocals in video game music personally. I know there's a lot of people who are very like anti-vocals in game music, but I love music. So, you know, vocals are, of course, in large majority a part of that experience. And I've said this before on previous episodes, but I always akin the vocals to another melody. So it's kind of like layering on top of layering on top of layering. So for me, that really gripped me. And that sax solo just, oh man, it's just buttery, as Justin would put it.
Yes.
But if I had to pick an immediate follow-up, it would probably be either Lady Blue or the Megaton Bop. Just the Lady Blue with the Vaporwave aesthetics. As soon as I heard that track, I was just like, oh yeah, like it just felt like such a groove, and I was bobbing my shoulders to it. And La Megaton Bop's just a straight-up New Jack Swing jam, which I will always support New Jack Swing music because I was fond of it growing up. Yeah. So we want to hear what you guys have to say about this soundtrack. What do you think of the tracks? Definitely let us know in our various social medias, Discord, Twitter. Hit us up via email. We want to definitely know what you thought of this amazing soundtrack. Barry, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. We know you're in Scotland and we're in the United States, so of course the time zones are kind of crazy. But where can we find you on the web, and what projects do you got coming out that you can share with us?
First of all, if you're a fan of the Paradise Killer tracks you've heard here, check out the full soundtrack. Like we said, it's on the Kaizen Gameworks Bandcamp. Also, we get the physical edition coming out this month, the vinyl, so grab that while you can. And if you like the sound of the game, you can pick it up on Steam. It's on GOG. You can pick it up on the eShop for Switch. And you can check me personally out. I have a SoundCloud, No Stopping Epoch, which is also my Twitter handle, at No Stopping Epoch. And yeah, I got some other music on Spotify, did a synthwave album, a couple of video game soundtracks. And I can't really talk about what I'm working on next, but there's stuff in the pipeline. And if you like the kind of music I'm writing, then you're going to like the next batch of music I'm writing.
That's exciting.
Awesome. Stoked to hear it. Well, you're welcome back anytime on the show. Thanks so much for being on XVGM Radio. And
Pleasure.
Yeah.
So we'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon patrons, without whom this show's continued improvement would be impossible. They are Alex Messenger, Cam Worma, Chris Hart, Dan Lawton, Jordan and Anson Davis, Kung Fu Carlito of the Heroes 3 podcast, Scott McElhone, Chris Myers, Peter Panda, The Autistic Gamer 89, Bedroth, Brad Austin, Chris Murray, Jeremy Rutz, Llama Adam, Marcus Stewart, Nathan Cooper, Nick Davis, and Ryan McPherson.
If you would like to become a patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/XVGMradio. There you can see the different tiers as well. Just $1 gets you a thank you at the end of the show and access to our monthly live shows.
You can visit our website, xvgmradio.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and learn more about your hosts, as well as any of our guests or composers that we've had on the show.
If you'd like to reach out to us, you can always email us at xvgmradio@gmail.com.
If you've liked what you've heard, please consider giving us a review on iTunes.
You can join our Facebook group and chat with other VGM lovers at facebook.com/groups/xvgmradio, where we talk about everything from current game news to sharing awesome VGM tracks, or just talking about the podcast itself.
You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle on both of those sites is @XVGMRadio.
If you don't have any other social media or just want to try something unique, check us out on our Discord group chat. Links will be in the show notes.
Justin, in 2 weeks, we're coming back for another episode of XVGM Radio. I don't know how we're going to top this one, but I think we're going to try to do it. What do we got coming up?
Well, I don't think we can top Barry Topping, but we are going to do another episode anyway. We're actually going to revisit a topic that we haven't touched on since the beginning of the podcast. We are going to take another trip back to the world of board games and card games as done in video games. I think we're going to open this up a little bit more than we did initially. The original episode that we did was strictly like board games and card games in real life that are being done as video games, and now we're kind of opening to like the Mario Party games. I wouldn't argue with being in there because that is a board game, even though it is a video game. So we're going to touch on that topic and expand.
Yeah. So board game, video games, or video games that have board game elements, that'll be it. Or pen and paper stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, that sort of thing. So we're going to definitely explore this topic a little bit more and open it up. So it's not just, stuff like Mousetrap, Sorry, Battleship, that type of stuff. We may have some of that stuff in there, but it's going to be good to kind of spread our wings and stretch our gullets.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So, come back in 2 weeks for episode 71, and you can party with us. This is Mike
and Justin
signing off for XVGM Radio. Let's get into a jam. Yeah. This is I've struggled with how to pronounce this, but I'm pretty sure it's the Megaton Bop.
Yeah, you can say Megaton, you can say Lemegeton as well. I believe it's like Epoch and Epoch again.
Right, there you go.
So whatever you want, that's fine by me, whatever you want to say.
Cool. Yeah, well, this song hits really hard, so I'm going to go with Megaton Bop because it's like a megaton of of just awesomeness. So yeah, this is the Megaton Bop by our composer guest of today, Barry Topping.